We're back at it for another one, folks. Welcome back to the Pixel Tea. And for those who are joining in over at the Mad Chatter, what's up? What's good? There's a lot of content on these YouTube streets going on today. So I thought we would talk about how we can rewire this brain. Let me know if anyone can hear me in the chat, if you get the opportunity that my mic is coming in clear, or if there's any really bad background sound, or if the music is too high or the music is too low. I would greatly appreciate it. Well-being for the brain is crucial for overall mental health and cognitive function. It involves taking care of the brain through various practices such as proper nutrition, regular exercise, adequate sleep, stress management, and mental stimulation. Examples of activities that promote brain well-being include mindfulness, meditation, engaging in challenging puzzles or games, learning new skills or languages, socializing with others, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Prioritizing brain well-being can lead to improved mood, memory, focus, and overall cognitive performance. I did a couple streams ago talking about generational trauma. And there's a lot of that in most of our lives. So I found some information that I thought I would share with everyone to maybe potentially help you out, help me out. So we'll dive into it here. It says, when people think about setting boundaries with toxic individuals, they usually think in terms of external actions. Before I get into that, this is going to be speaking about focusing on yourself to help change everything. Silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. How energy alignment attracts what you deserve. The beauty of minded business. Protecting your peace is the priority. Growth happens in silence. Let your results do the talking. Everything will align when you align. So we'll start off with just that. It says again, toxic individuals, they usually think in terms of external actions, what to say, how to respond, when to walk away. But what neuroscience and psychology show us quite definitively is that lasting change doesn't begin out there, it begins in here with your own nervous system, your own focus, your own self-regulation. This is what referred to in psychology as internal locus of control. The belief and lived reality that your outcomes are not dictated by the chaos around you, but by the stability within you. Here's what's important to understand. Toxic people are not just attracted to who you are, they are attracted to how you are. Your level of reactivity, your emotional openness to chaos, your availability to participate in drama. So the shift starts the moment you recognize you don't need to convince anyone to respect you. You just need to stop needing their validation. And this isn't abstract, it's deeply biological. When you start regulating your own nervous system through breath work, possibly things like cold exposure, journaling, or any consistent practice, you're literally changing the signals your body emits. You're moving from a state of hyperarousal to one of homeostasis. And from that place, you stop being a target toxic individuals tend to look for emotional leverage. But when you're centered, when you're not leaking energy, not explaining yourself, not reacting, they can't find a way in. So instead of asking, why do toxic people keep showing up in my life? A more powerful question is, what part of me keeps resonating with that energy? Good to see you, Live and Learn. All is well on my end, sir. Says again, what part of me keeps resonating with that energy? When you answer that, when you take radical ownership of your emotional state and your energetic presence, something incredible happens. You no longer attract what you've outgrown, and that's when the shift becomes visible. But it always starts invisibly internally with you. There's a core principle in neuroscience that's often overlooked in the context of human relationships. Neuroplasticity follows attention, in other words. What you focus on, you become more of. So when you spend your time and your energy focusing on toxic people, what they said and what they did, how they make you feel, your brain is literally reinforcing neural pathways that keep you stuck in that cycle. You become neurologically wired for hypervigilance, anxiety, and emotional reactivity. And that's not your fault, it's just what the brain does when exposed to chaos repeatedly. But here's where the real power lies. The moment you redirect that focus inward, you begin to reclaim your brain. Your attention is the most valuable resource you have. It's the one lever you can pull that has the power to rewire everything. Your mood, your mindset, your behavior, and yes, even your relationships. When you begin focusing on your routines, your breath, your movement, your rest, your boundaries, you're building something much deeper than just self-care. You're building internal coherence. Your mind, body, and nervous system start working in sync. That's when you become what we call self-regulating. And here's what's fascinating. When you become self-regulating, you stop being emotionally available to things that are dysregulating toxic people. Emotionally available to things that are dysregulating. Toxic people lose their grip not because they changed, but because you're no longer giving them the one thing they need from you: emotional fuel. This is where behavioral psychology aligns perfectly with neurobiology. We know that when someone's behavior isn't rewarded, it tends to extinguish this. It tends to extinguish. This applies to manipulation, guilt tripping, gaslighting. It all fades when you stop reacting and start redirecting. So the big shift isn't about cutting people off, it's about cutting off the supply of attention that was unconsciously sustaining those dynamics. The result, you become less reactive, more intentional, and the people who were once a central source of stress simply stop showing up. They stop showing up with the same power. Why? Because your nervous system no longer meets theirs. In the same chaotic frequency, you're to something calmer, something higher, and that frequency, it repels what no longer serves you and attracts everything that does not, and attracts everything that does one of the most misunderstood behavioral responses, especially in the face of manipulation, provocation, or emotional conflict. Silence. It's silence. Many interpret silence as avoidance, passivity, or weakness, but in reality, silence is often one of the most neurologically powerful and strategically intelligent responses available to us. Let's look at this through the lens of the nervous system. When you're triggered by someone toxic, your body tends to default into a sympathetic nervous system response: fight, flight, or freeze. Your heart rate elevates, cortisol is released, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thinking and emotional regulation, goes partially offline. That's why arguments escalate quickly. That's why you say things you regret, because in this moment, you're not speaking from clarity. You're speaking from activation. But when you choose silence, something radically different happens inside the brain. You create space. You give the prefrontal cortex time to re-engage. You exit the loop of escalation and re-enter a place of internal authority. Silence is not shutting down, it's tuning in. It says, I'm aware of what's happening, but I'm not giving you access to my energy. In psychological terms, silence is a boundary, and boundaries don't always have to be spoken. Sometimes the most powerful boundary you can set is your absence from the emotional stage. Someone is trying to pull you onto. What's more, silence communicates strength on a primal level. People who are grounded in their identity don't need to defend themselves constantly. They don't need to explain themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. In fact, true confidence often speaks the loudest when it says nothing at all. Silence also gives toxic individuals what they fear most: a lack of control. When you don't react, you don't explain, justify, or argue, you remove their ability to hook into your nervous system. You refuse to enter their drama loop, and slowly but surely they begin to recognize this. This person is no longer accessible in the way they used to be. So the next time you feel that rising urge to defend yourself, to prove your point, to respond to someone's toxicity, pause, breathe, allow silence to do what words cannot, because that pause isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's nervous system mastery, and over time, it becomes the very thing that dissolves the toxic dynamics you once felt trapped inside of. One of the most profound yet overlooked truths in both psychology and neuroscience is that we are always transmitting energy, even when we say nothing. This isn't esoteric, it's psychological. The way we breathe, move, carry tension, speak, and respond sends out signals to the people around us. These signals are picked up often, subconsciously by others, through what are called mirror neurons and limbic resonance. In other words, your internal state is constantly broadcasting itself to the world, and others respond accordingly. So, when your energy is erratic, stressed, or anxious, you unconsciously draw in people and situations that match that frequency. This is why certain toxic individuals seem to find you over and over again, because part of your internal environment is still a match for the chaos they bring. But the moment you begin to align your energy with peace, self-respect, and clarity, everything shifts from a neurological standpoint. This alignment begins with the regulation of the autonomic nervous system. Daily practices that anchor you, like deep diaphragmatic breathing, exercise, another example, cold exposure, mindfulness, help you stabilize your physiology. And when your physiology stabilizes, your emotional reactivity decreases. You start choosing your response rather than reacting impulsively. This internal steadiness changes what and who you attract. People who operate from manipulation, emotional volatility, or narcissistic patterns no longer feel at home around you. They can't find a hook to latch onto, and instead you begin to attract relationships, opportunities, and environments that reflect your inner sense of calm and worth. Not because you're seeking them, but because your baseline energy now aligns with them. We often talk about boundaries as something external, what you will or won't tolerate, but your most powerful boundary is your energy. When your energy no longer entertains chaos, chaos stops knocking. So if you want to shift what you attract in your life, whether it's in relationships, career, or purpose, you don't start by changing your surroundings, you start by aligning your internal environment. Because the brain and body are constantly scanning the world, asking one question: does this match me? And when you raise your internal frequency, only things and people that match that new level can stay there. It's something profoundly liberating and biologically grounding about fully owning your lane in neuroscience. We often talk about the brain's limited attention bandwidth. What that means is you only have so much cognitive energy in a day, and every time you divert that energy towards trying to decode someone else's behavior, fix someone else's problems, or manage how others perceive you, you're depleting the very resource that fuels your own growth and peace. Here's where the science and the psychology align beautifully. When you mind your own business, you're not ignoring the world, you're optimizing your brain. You're creating a loop of dopamine reinforcement around your own behaviors, not others' dopamine. The molecule of motivation and focus spikes when we make progress towards goals that matter to us. So when your attention shifts from why are they acting like this to how can I show up better today, you begin to biologically reward yourself for forward motion. And here's the best part. The more you focus on your own path, your habits, your vision, your mental state, the less appealing drama becomes. Your nervous system starts to associate peace with progress. Chaos feels like noise drama. Drama feels like a drain, and slowly, without even needing to set an explosive boundary or make a big statement, you become unavailable to toxicity. Not because you said no, but because you're saying yes to something much more powerful. There's also a psychological phenomenon at play called selective attention. When you start paying attention to your own growth, your brain begins filtering out distractions, especially emotional ones. You don't even notice the bait people try to throw at you. You're too locked in on what actually matters, and to those who once fed off your energy, you've become boring emotionally. Inaccessible, and that's a win. So, the beauty of a minded business isn't just that it helps you avoid unnecessary stress, it's that it amplifies your energy, sharpens your focus, and creates an internal environment where toxic people simply don't fit, because the truth is, peace isn't passive, it's produced. And when you're focused on building that day by day, you naturally rise above the noise without even needing to fight it. In both the neuroscience and psychology, we've come to understand that chronic stress is one of the most corrosive forces on the human body and brain. It impacts memory, mood, immune function, sleep quality, and even the speed at which we age. And what's one of the biggest contributors to chronic stress? Unhealthy relationships. This is why protecting your peace isn't just some vague self-help concept, it's a biological imperative if your nervous system is constantly in flight or flight mode. Because of the people around you always anticipating the next argument, insult, or guilt trip, you're wiring your brain for reactivity, not resilience. Peace, on the other hand, isn't something that just happens, it's something you protect, and often that protection looks like not engaging, not responding, not chasing closure. It looks like choosing environments that match your values. It looks like walking away from conversations that leave your body tense and your mind spinning. Here's the crucial shift when you begin to prioritize your peace. You stop compromising with dysfunction. You stop shrinking yourself to keep the room calm. And your brain begins to associate safety not with approval from others, but with alignment within yourself. That's a game That's a game changer neurologically and emotionally. You don't owe anyone access to your nervous system. And once you deeply internalize that, you begin making different choices about who you let in, how long you stay, and what you tolerate. Peace becomes the filter. If it costs your mental clarity, your physical health, or your emotional stability, the answer becomes simple. It's too expensive. Over time, the consistent choice to protect your peace rewires your system. What once triggered you no longer registers. What once pulled you in now repels you and toxic people. And they'll notice not because you made a scene, but because you made yourself unavailable. And that's the real power. Not in how loudly you say goodbye, but in how silently you reclaim yourself. One of the most misunderstood aspects of transformation is that it doesn't need to be broadcast. In fact, the most profound growth often happens when no one is watching. This is not just a poetic idea, it's backed by neuroscience. When you're in a state of deep internal change, your brain enters a mode of focused rewiring. It's called neuroplasticity, and it requires both attention and repetition, but it also requires space, mental space, emotional space, and sometimes social space. When you step back from the noise, especially from the toxic or distracting relationships, you give your nervous system the stillness it needs to recalibrate. This silence isn't emptiness, it's integration. It's your mind finally having the bandwidth to reflect, to reassess, and to rewire. Think of it like training a muscle growth that doesn't happen during the workout. It happens in the recovery, in the silence, in the repair. But here's the challenge. We're in condition to seek validation during our evolution. We want others to notice that we're changing, that we're growing, that we're no longer who we were. But the true growth isn't about being seen, it's about seeing yourself differently. And that shift happens most powerfully when you're alone with your thoughts, your routines, and your boundaries. Silence also protects you during the most vulnerable stages of change, because when you're upgrading your habits, your mindset, your energy, you're delicate, and exposing that too early to the wrong people can destabilize the entire process. Toxic individuals often sense when you're evolving, and they may try to pull you back into old patterns, not because they're evil, but because your growth threatens their control. So in the early stage of transformation, silence becomes your sanctuary. You're not hiding, you're incubating. You're creating a new internal architecture that doesn't require permission or applause, and eventually the change will speak for themselves. Your energy will shift, your presence will feel different. The things that used to trigger you will no longer stick, and the people who once had access to the old version of you, they won't know how to reach this new version because it was built in silence and it doesn't speak the same emotional language anymore. In neuroscience, there's something known as salience, the brain's mechanism for detecting what matters most. It filters out noise and zeroes in on what's real, what's consistent, and what produces results. The same applies in life. People eventually stop listening to your words and start paying attention to your outcomes. This is why, as you grow, especially away from toxic relationships or environments, you don't need to argue, defend, or explain your evolution. You just need to embody it. Because when your actions align with your intentions and your energy matches your values, you become someone people feel the difference in, even if you never say a word. Here's how this works. Biologically, every time you choose a behavior that supports your peace, your focus, or your integrity, your brain reinforces that decision with a reward signal. Over time, these small wins compound your build, self-trust. You increase baseline dopamine levels. You shift your identity, not through declaration, but through repetition. That's what creates results, and results create credibility, not to others first, but to yourself. And this is important. Toxic people thrive in the space between your intentions and your execution. If you say you're going to cut them off, but don't follow through, if you say you want space, peace, but keep responding to chaos, they will always exploit that inconsistency. But when your actions become precise, consistent, and quiet, you remove that access. The only thing left from them to observe is your distance, your discipline, and your results. Letting your results speak also removes you from the emotional tug of war. You no longer feel the need to justify your distance or explain your boundaries. You just live in alignment. And the right people who are secure emotionally, mature, and growth oriented will respect that. The wrong people, they'll fall away, not because you push them out, but because they cannot connect with the version you no longer need. They're chaos. So instead of posting about your peace, embody it. Instead of warning people you're changing, just change. And instead of giving energy to old dynamics, put that energy into becoming undeniable. Because in the end, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Just live. So clearly in your truth that even your silence is loud. There's a powerful concept in both neuroscience and psychology called coherence, a state where your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are in harmony. When you are internally aligned, your brain functions more efficiently, your heart rate variably improves, your cortisol levels stabilize, and your ability to make clear, empowered decisions increases. But this coherence doesn't just affect your biology, it affects your entire experience of life. When you align with your truth, everything external begins to shift. Toxic relationships fall away, not because you forced them out, but because you stopped resonating with them. The energy it once took to defend yourself, to over-explain, to manage someone else's dysfunction, it's now redirected inward towards your goals, your peace, your growth, alignment. Your growth alignment isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. It means choosing what's right over what's easy, choosing stillness over chaos, choosing self-respect over people pleasing. And each of those choices reinforces your nervous system sense of safety, autonomy, and clarity. That's when you stop chasing external validation. You stop reacting to other people's dysfunction. You start moving from a grounded place where nothing and no one can knock you off center. And here's what's truly beautiful. The moment you align internally, life starts to mirror that alignment back to you. New people enter your world, opportunities flow more easily, synchronicities appear, not because of luck, but because your system is no longer clouded by resistance or chaos. You've created space for what actually belongs. So if there's one thing to take away, it's this. You don't need to fight for peace. You don't need to beg people to treat you right. You simply need to align with the version of yourself that no longer entertains what drains you. The rest will fall away naturally when your mind, body, and energy are working in harmony. Toxic people lose their power not because you defeated them, but because you evolved beyond them. And in that quiet evolution, you find exactly what you were looking for all along. Clarity, strength, and peace. No one can take away. What's good? How you doing, Red? Peace and salutes to you, King. Ms. Zinger, I'm glad you caught me live as well. Good to see you. Much love to you too, Fools and Tools. Yeah, I'm just chilling too. You could tell by the music, by the vibe, I'm just chilling. Just sharing some information with you guys that is working for me, so I'm passing it on. This is all going to be about how to release the stress from the brain and reconnect the neural network of the brain. This one is going to talk about how to rewire your brain within 3 days. I don't know so much about the 3 days, but I appreciated the read. Oops. There it is. Thank you, Ms. Inger. I appreciate that. I think this is a really great message. That's why I'm passing it on. Everybody's journey is different. Don't be discouraged on your path, how quick it's going. Don't forget about the silent achievements that you've done along the way. Give yourself a pat on the back. Take care. Yes, ma'am. Those are words of wisdom. I can tell that those are words of wisdom. And that's what we need out on this YouTube platform, is some wisdom. So this is going to focus on self-talk. So what our thoughts are. The way you speak to yourself changes the way your brain rewires itself. It's not just psychology, it's neurobiology. And in just 3 days, you can start to reshape your internal landscape. What if I told you that your internal dialogue, the words you use with yourself, has a direct and measurable impact on your neurochemistry? That it affects your levels of dopamine, adrenaline, and even the GABA, the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in your brain. And I'm going to pause there for just a second. When I read these things, I'm also speaking to myself, which is why I appreciate being able to have this digital journal to listen back on, because these are very wise words here that I'm reading to you. It says, for 3 days, I want you to run an experiment. This is not a positive thinking. This is a self-directed neuroplasticity. When you deliberately change your inner language, you're tapping into the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, and in the insula areas of the brain, responsible for self-awareness, emotional regulation, and motivation. What we say to ourselves, especially under stress, can either spiral us into a fight or flight loop, or activate calm, clarity, and focus. So here's the protocol. For the next 3 days, I want you to do 3 things. Speak to yourself in the second person. Say, "You've got this," not "I've got this." And again, I appreciated this because I've changed my internal dialogue. I've beat myself up for years. I need to stop doing that. So I really enjoyed this. I keep saying that, but it's true. Studies show that this shifts your brain out of ego-based self-critique and into coaching mode. You become your own guide, not your own critic. Start your morning with identity statements, not goals. Say you are someone who keeps promises to yourself, not "I will go to the gym." Identity is sticky. It wires deeper into your neural circuitry. Then intention catch negative self-talk and label it. Say that's a thought, not a fact. This activates your prefrontal cortex and gives you distance from rumination. This isn't motivational fluff, it's neuroscience. The brain listens, the body responds, and after 3 days, just 3, you'll begin to feel the shift. Less reactivity, more clarity, more energy. You'll start to become the voice you needed to hear. When most people engage in internal dialogue, they default to first person language. I'm anxious, I can't do this, or I need to be better. While this might feel natural, studies in cognitive neuroscience and sports psychology reveal that this internal narrative style is actually limiting, especially under conditions of stress or high cognitive load. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Research conducted at the University of Michigan and other neuroscience labs shows that shifting to second person using using you instead of I create a psychological buffer. This shift activates brain circuits associated with perspective talking, specifically within the middle prefrontal cortex and temporal partial junction. These are regions responsible for distinguishing between self and others, but they also give us the ability to step back and coach ourselves through difficulty. So instead of saying I can't do this, you say you've done harder. You can do this. The change might seem subtle, but the effects are profound. When you use your brain responds as if the guidance is coming from someone else you trust, like a mentor or coach, which increases compliance and decreases resistance. This shift in perspective has been shown to improve self-regulation, boost emotional control, and enhance problem solving under pressure. Athletes use it. Elite military operators use it. And we now understand the neurobiological reason why it works. Second person language decreases activity in brain areas associated with self-critical rumination and increases task-oriented focus. From a biochemical standpoint, this can reduce cortisol release and elevate dopaminic tone, particularly when the self-talk is paired with small wins or progress signals. That means it doesn't just feel more empowering, it literally shifts your brain chemistry toward motivation and confidence. When practiced consistently, this becomes a form of real-time mental training. You're not just thinking differently, you're engaging in cognitive protocol that rewires how your nervous system responds to challenge. So for the next 3 days, catch those internal moments and coach yourself like someone you care about. You've got this. You've done harder things. You know what matters right now. This isn't just better thinking, this is neuroscience applied. Most people wake up and set goals. I'm going to the gym. I'll clean today. I need to stop procrastinating. While well-intentioned, goal-based thinking is often fragile, it relies on motivation, which is inherently unstable, and it keeps your brain operating from a future-focused framework, which can increase cognitive friction and anxiety. Now, here's the neuroscience behind a better approach. Identity-based statements, when you say, I am someone who follows you through, or you are the kind of person who shows up, no matter how you feel. You're not just setting a goal, you're activating neural networks related to self-satisfying and default mode. Network integration. Excuse me. Rub my eyes here. I have something in my eyes. That means you're teaching your brain who you are, not just what you want to do. This taps into something we call self-referential processing. The brain treats identity as something sacred and non-negotiable. So when a behavior is tied to your identity, not just a temporary desire, your nervous system fights harder to maintain it. This is supported by studies in behavior change, psychology, and neural identity statements light up midline cortical structures like the medial prefrontal cortex and postural cingulate cortex regions, deeply involved in autobiographical memory. And meaning this gives the statement emotional weight and stickiness. When you act from identity, you're not struggling to become something. You're expressing something you already are. That removes internal resistance, and in terms of neuroplasticity, that's crucial. Repetition of behavior tied to identity forms stronger, more stable neural pathways, the kind that actually hold under stress. So instead of saying, I will try to be productive today, you say, you are the kind of person who handles hard things and doesn't make excuses. The brain will begin to match behavior to identity automatically. That's what it's built to do. You know this isn't about tricking yourself, it's about aligning your internal language with the neurobiological machinery of change. Remember, your brain doesn't care what you hope to do, it cares what you believe you are, and that belief, when reinforced consistently, becomes your default operating system. Identity leads behavior follows one of the most powerful tools we have for emotional regulation and mental clarity. It's incredibly simple, but deeply supported by neuroscience. It's the ability to label when you're caught in a loop of negative self-talk. I'm not good enough. I always mess this up. This is going to fail. Your brain is engaging in default mode. So in other words, folks, get yourself out of default mode. Default mode network activity. This network, which includes the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, becomes highly active when we ruminate, judge ourselves, or worry about the future. But here's the protocol. Instead of believing the thought, you label it. You say to yourself, that's a thought, not a fact. What this does from a neurological standpoint is shift activity from the limbic system, especially the amygdala, shit, I can't say that word. It's part of the brain. Amygdala. Damn, need to practice that. Associated with fear and emotion. That's an important word to learn, especially because it's associated with fear and emotion. To the prefrontal cortex, which governs logic, regulations, and decisions. You know what I think why I'm having a difficult time with that is because I'm reading, this one is a transcript, and I think that it's not giving me the correct word. I think that's why I'm having a difficult time reading it. Anyways, which governs logic, regulation, and decision. You're literally redirecting blood flow and neural activity away from panic and toward executive function. There's a term for this in cognitive behavioral neuroscience: cognitive diffusion. It's the process of separating yourself from your thoughts rather than fusing with them. When you label a thought as just that, a mental event, your brain no longer reacts to it as if it's an objective threat. And here's the remarkable part. Neural studies show that people who practice this form of labeling, even in just a few times a day, show increased activation in the right ventricle prefrontal cortex and decreased activity in the amygdala. That means more calm, more control, and less stress. So when that voice shows up in the inner critic, the catastrophizer, the imposter syndrome, you interrupt the loop. You don't argue with it. You don't try to support it. You just say that a thought, not a fact. That 1 second pause creates just enough space for awareness, and the awareness is the seed of behavioral change. Over time, with repetition, this simple active labeling becomes neuroproductive. You condition your brain to stop treating everything negative On the negative thought, like a call to action or a crisis, you restore regulation, you reduce cortisol, you build resilience. This isn't about ignoring reality, it's about mastering the way your nervous system responds to perceived threat. And that starts with realizing not everything you think is true. Label the thought, reclaim the mind. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change its structure and function, is not something that happens passively. It's not automatic, and it's not always beneficial. It's experience dependent, meaning that you repeatedly think, feel, say, and do literally reshape your neural circuitry. This is foundational. Every time you engage in a behavior, every time you speak to yourself a certain way, you're sculpting your brain. Yeah, I know it's pretty funny when I mess up. I make myself laugh. It's all practice. It's all practice. Neurons that fire together, wire together. That's the core of plasticity. But what most people forget is that the neurons also prune when they're unused. So you're either reinforcing or weakening pathways all the time. Now, when it comes to internal dialogue, the words you use with yourself, this is one of the fastest and most consistent inputs your brain receives. That means your self-talk is one of the primary drivers of your neuroplastic change. When you tell yourself, I always screw this up, or I'm not disciplined, and you repeat that narrative, the brain doesn't debate you. It rewires to support that version of reality. It creates and strengthens circuits that recognize that as truth. And that becomes your perceptual filter. But here's the upside. You can reverse it. So that's what this is all about. This is why I'm sharing this with you. We can reverse this negative talk, folks. We can rewire our brains. You can reshape those circuits by deliberately introducing adaptive, empowering language over and over again. This is why the way you speak to yourself, even if it feels fake at first, matters, because plasticity isn't about what feels true. Right now, it's about what gets repeated. The more a pathway is used, the more myelination occurs along that axiom, making the signal stronger, faster, more automatic. That's not philosophy, that's neuroscience. And here's something else to know. Neuroplasticity is gated by two things, attention and emotion. That means when you're fully focused and emotionally engaged in what you're saying to yourself, or even just a few seconds, the impact on your brain is significantly amplified. So if you want to change, not just think about changing, you need to understand this principle. Your brain becomes what you do most often with the most. Focus. You are not rewiring your brain by thinking. Once you're rewiring it through repetition with intensity, neuroplasticity doesn't care if you self-talk or positive or negative. It only cares if it's consistent and emotionally salient. So every time you speak to yourself with clarity, discipline, or courage, you're not just changing your mindset, you're training your biology to align with your best self. The work is daily. The change is cumulative. The brain listens. Key points. 5 internal language alters. Neurochemistry. The way you talk to yourself is not just a mindset, it's a chemical event. Every internal phrase you repeat, especially under stress, triggers a neurochemical cascade in your brain and and body. This isn't just about thinking positively or using affirmations. This is about how language modulates neurotransmitter release, shifting your entire internal environment. Let's break this down. When you speak to yourself in ways that are encouraging, focused, and action-oriented, for example, you've done this before or built for this, your brain interprets that not just as information, but as signal. It leads to increase in dopamine, the neuron modulator of motivation and forward motivation. Dopamine doesn't just make you feel good, it creates momentum. It strengthens the neural circuits associated with progress, motivation, and reward. It enhances focus and primes your brain to seek challenge and overcome it. This is critical when you're trying to reframe your identity or sustain effort through something hard. But there's more internal language. Also, it influences levels of adrenaline and norepinephrine chemicals involved in altered alertness, arousal, and attention. When you self-talk or are overly critical, things like "I can't handle this" or "this always goes wrong," your system gets flooded with stress chemistry. That means elevated sympathetic nervous system activity, tighter muscles, shallower breathing, and compromised decision making. In contrast, calming self-coaching language like "you're safe," "stay with it," or "you're in control here" has been shown to increase GABA, your brain's primary inhibitory transmitter. GABA acts like a brake system, reducing overactivity in the fear centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala. And here's the beautiful part. You can actually feel the shift in real time when your internal language changes. Breath slows, muscles release, cognition sharpens. That's not placebo, it's state change, triggered by language-driven modulation of brain chemistry. Now, none of this is theoretical. fMRI and PET scan studies have shown that different forms of internal dialogue, particularly self-compassionate versus self-critical, activate very different neural circuits and neurochemical pathways. So when you upgrade your inner language, you're not just talking to yourself differently, you're regulating your entire neurobiological system. You're changing the ingredients your brain uses to predict, perceive, and respond to the world. This is why what you say and how you say it to yourself becomes one of the most important levers for shifting out of stress and into a high-forming adaptive state internal language. Neurochemical leverage. Use it wisely. One of the biggest misunderstandings around self-talk is the idea that just needs to be positive to be effective. But in reality, vague affirmations like "everything's going to be fine" or "I'm amazing" often have minimal or even counterproductive impact on the brain. Why? Because the brain is prediction. It's a prediction machine. It wants precision. When the language you use internally is too abstract or disconnected from your actual experience, the brain flags it as incongruent, and it doesn't activate the neural systems responsible for real change. So here's the real precision. Beats positivity if your self-talk is going to create neurobiological change. It must be anchored in context and specificity. That means instead of saying "great," say "you're prepared." Say that you're prepared for this. You've executed this exact process before under pressure. That small shift moves you. It moves your self-talk from empty affirmation into evidence-based reinforcement, and that has a very different effect on the nervous system. Why does this matter? Because precise self-talk recruits more activity in the prefrontal cortex, which governs planning, reasoning, and adaptive behavior. It also creates a feedback loop that reinforces behaviorally aligned identity. You're not trying to convince yourself of something, you're reminding your system of what's already true. This leads to greater neural efficiency and emotional coherence. Vague affirmations, by contrast, tend to engage less neural specificity, and if repeated without alignment to real behavior, can actually increase cognitive dissonance. In other words, your brain subtly resists the statement because it can't find real-world evidence to support it, and that resistance shows up as discomfort, or internal friction. Think of your internal dialogue like a targeting system for behavior and emotion. The more specific and timely your language is, the better it guides your system towards adaptive outcomes. So don't just say, I'll do better. Say, you're the kind of person who stays calm during feedback. You know exactly what to adjust, and you're already doing it. This form of language activates dopaminergic and goal-relevant networks because it references actual process behavior and identity, not just outcome. Bottom line, positivity isn't the goal, precision is. And when you practice using precise, situationally relevant self-talk, you're not just giving yourself a motivational boost, you're coding your brain for resilience, consistency, and performance. There is a misconception that change in the brain takes months or years to begin, but that's not entirely accurate. While long-term change does not require consistency, the first signs of neuroplastic adaptation begins in hours to days, not weeks. In fact, research shows that 3 consecutive days of deliberate, focused internal practice, especially self-talk, can begin to trigger what's called a plasticity cascade. This is the early stage process where synaptic connections begin to strengthen. New neural pathways are initiated and old patterns begin to weaken. Let's break this down. Your brain is constantly evaluating which circuits to reinforce. It does this based on frequency, intensity, and relevance of input. So if over the course of 3 days you consistently engage in intentional, emotionally salient self-work, your brain starts to shift in wiring to support that internal narrative. This happens in phases. Immediate early genes like COS are activated within neurons, which are indicators that new learning or emotional salience has occurred. These are tuned on within minutes to hours of repeated exposure to novel stimuli, like speaking to yourself in a new adaptive way. If the input continues, especially with the emotion attached, the brain begins to produce neurophins like BDNF, brain-derived neurofactor, which helps solidify these new pathways. Its direct influence on the autonomic nervous system, as this is the part of your nervous system that regulates automatic processes like heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, digestion, and the stress response. In simpler terms, how you speak to yourself influences how your body feels and performs. Now the automatic nervous system has 2 primary branches: the sympathetic branch, which drives alertness, readiness, and stress, often referred to as fight or flight; the parasympathetic branch, which governs calm, recovery, and restoration, known as rest and digest. Your internal language can push you into either state, depending on its tone, precision, and emotional content. For example, when your self-talk is anxious, self-critical, or defeatist, I can't handle this, everything's going to go wrong, it amplifies sympathetic tone. That means increased heart rates, shallower breathing, elevated cortisol, and reduced ability to think clearly. The brain interprets that inner voice as a threat cue and prepares the body accordingly. But when you shift to intentional self-coaching language, even something as simple as "you're okay," "stay grounded," "you know what to do next," you activate circuits in the prefrontal cortex, which are known to down-regulate limbic reactivity and engage parasympathetic tone. So I think we get it's repeating the same message over and over again. I agree with you, Miss Zinger. negative self-talk is not an easy one to defeat. So I'm in that process right now. And it's not an easy one. I've been trying to find different ways to avoid telling myself shitty talk, you know. You want to make it to tomorrow, you have to live it today. Watch your words and watch your thoughts. Yes, ma'am. Good to see you, NPC. Thank you for stopping by. Yes, evolution of the mind in real time. That's right. We are going to switch onto a different gear here, man. For reals. Hello, Ms. Bex. Hola, hola. Buenos noches. Thank you. What's up, Miss Cynthia? Chica Loca in the house. What's good, Copper Tone? Okay, so all of us here are very aware of panels and chats. So I'm going to go up with a different, well, I have been. When I go up on a panel, I have a different approach to how I'm going to engage when I participate. In pace and intonation, all of those things, I'm very aware. I've mentioned this in the past. I work with animals for a living. And so how I approach an animal, how I touch them, how I speak to them, if their vision is well, my eye contact with them, all of these things are what I use in my profession. So when we're on the internet, there was a time last year when I had others telling me that they didn't trust me because they couldn't see my eyes, which is understandable. But then it got used against me, right? Because there's people lurking in the bushes and are in their feelers all the time and want to create content out of you that benefits them when they don't like something that you said to them. So I've chosen to create a boundary there and not give them what they want. You know what I mean? Like, screw that. I mean, I'm not saying I won't ever show my face again. I just am aware that that's the bullshit that happens on here from time to time. That's all I'm trying to say. But these are also, that was a hard read for me to do because I was reading from a transcript, and I'm sure that there was music and background noise and all of that messed up the transcript. So, and it doesn't give you periods or anything like that. You just have to get your own flow with the words. So, practicing. Okay, what's this next one? So this next one is going to be, and this is the last one. Thanks for those of you who have been here from the beginning and those who have tapped in and out. I appreciate you stopping by. It says, cut off these 7 types of people before it's too late. The chronic complainer, the energy leech, the non-believer in your vision, the perpetual victim, the envious saboteur, the drama magnet, and the manipulator. And those of us that are here in this live right now and in my chat, I'm sure all y'all can completely attach a person or many persons to each one of those examples. Let's see here. Let's check out this chat one more time. Yeah, indeed. For real. Indeed, we know. So this one is to give you guys technically, I guess it's advice, or maybe just highlighting on your wall a little poster of the warning signs. When people think about optimizing their brain and their body, they often focus on things like nutrition, sleep, breath work, and all of these are absolutely important. But there's one area that's just critical, and it's often overlooked. The people you surround yourself with. That's consistently what I'm talking about. Pay attention, and potentially audit your inner circle, right? And if you choose to have a channel that allows live panels and it gets exhausting after a while, then it's time to do an audit, right? And readjust when you're done with your audit. It's that easy. Okay. So the people you surround yourself with. Why does this matter? Because the human brain is highly social. We're wired to connect, and our nervous system mirrors the state of those around us from a neuroscience standpoint. This person that I've found articles and also YouTube uses that word neuroscience. And to me, this person is a little pseudoscience as well. But when you understand that words of wisdom apply, then it doesn't matter if it's pseudo or not. And in my opinion, if it applies and it works for you, then go with it, right? Yeah, check yourself before you wreck yourself, for damn sake. It means that every person you allow in your life becomes a kind of neurological co-pilot. Okay. Their behavior, their mood, their mindset, all of that becomes a signal. Your brain receives, encodes, and often begins to replicate. We know from research in social neuroscience that your brain's architecture, your emotional regulation, your stress response, your baseline levels of motivation and energy, all of that is shaped by the quality of your relationships. So this isn't just about good vibes or avoiding drama. It's about preserving your neurobiological integrity, especially on this internet, right? It's about filtering out inputs that degrade your nervous system, and instead of building an environment internally and externally that supports your long-term growth and resilience. Now, this can be uncomfortable because we often are talking about people we care about or have known for a long time. But the truth is, not everyone is meant to stay. Some relationships expire. And if we ignore the signs, the cost isn't just emotional, it's biological. It's cognitive, it's chemical. So today, he's going to walk us through 7 types of people that if you continue to give them unlimited access to your mind and your life, will slowly erode your clarity, your energy, your emotional stability, and ultimately your potential. This is about awareness, it's about boundaries, and most importantly, it's about creating a system, a life where your brain can actually thrive. Now let's be clear, expressing frustration or venting when life gets hard is normal and even healthy. We all experience stress, and talking about it can be a way to process emotion and gain perspective, which is what we do on these panels. What I'm referring to here is something very different. It's chronic complaining, which we all know a chronic complainer. I'm speaking to myself as well when I'm reading these things out. Chronic complaining. This is the person who consistently fixates on what's wrong, who views themselves as a perpetual victim of life, and who rarely, if ever, seeks solutions. Why is this dangerous? From a neuroscience standpoint, repeated exposure to negativity actually rewires your brain. There's a concept in neuroplasticity called Hebbian learning, often summed up as neurons that wire together when you're consistently hearing negativity. When someone is complaining all the time, your brain's default mode network becomes more attuned to scanning for problems, threats, and limitations, even when things are going well. Let's see here. I liked that one. It's true, you can tell a lot about someone by who they hang with. Yeah, I mean, these panels are such a good when you want to study the sociology and the psychology of people. Um, the hive-minded groupthink, I talk about that consistently wherever I go, but that's what happens, is that people tend to lose their individuality and morph into the content creator that they're attracted to for whatever reason. And then everybody hive minds together, and they stop thinking for themselves, which is why I appreciate people that are, you can tell, are independent of that, and they stand out. I appreciate people like that. Okay, lost my spot. Okay, so the brain's default mode network becomes more attuned to scanning for problems, threats, and limitations, even when things are going well. In other words, you begin to internalize their lens of the world. Chronic negativity impacts areas like the anterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in emotional regulation, in the amygdala. When I get off of this live, I'm going to go on and ask how the enunciation of this damn word is, just so I get it right, because it's driving me crazy. Amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center. Over time, you may notice yourself becoming more irritable, more anxious, or more pessimistic without even knowing why. That's because your nervous system is absorbing emotional residue from your environment. Damn, there be hella emotional residue on these panels. There's some panels that straight ooze emotional residue. And that doesn't just affect your mood, it impairs cognition. It reduces your capacity for creative problem solving. It lowers your threshold. So see, that's another thing, is that somebody can come up onto a panel and share some very wise words, but if that content creator is not in agreement with you, all it takes is for them to have their flying monkeys come out and distract from the obvious common sense that is being spoken at that time, right? Reduces your capacity for creative problem solving, lowers your threshold for mental fatigue, and interferes with the brain's dopamine systems, which are critical for motivation and forward movement. Here's the real problem. Chronic complainers often don't want to help. They're not seeking change, they're seeking co-rumination. We all know someone that's like that on here. A psychological behavior where people bond by sharing negativity over and over without resolution, which is a hell realm. I'm going to use that as an example. So when everybody wants to stay in that state of lower consciousness and talk about how this world is a hell realm, that is that's just an example of being stuck in this state, right, of negativity. They stay in this state of negativity without resolution, right? They're not happy. They're always miserable. And while this might feel like connection, it's actually mutually reinforcing dysfunction. Y'all, it's dysfunctional. Now, What you can do is that you don't have to cut someone off completely, especially if it's someone you love or work with, but you can create emotional boundaries. You can limit the amount of time and energy you spend with engaging with unproductive negativity. You can redirect conversations. I hear you. That sounds tough. What do you think? What do you think you can do about it? If they don't want to shift gears, that's information and information power. Ultimately, your attention is one of the most precious neurobiological currencies you have. Where you place it determines what your brain prioritizes, what emotions you feel, and how resilient you become. If someone is constantly pulling that attention toward dysfunction, pessimism, or drama, you need to ask yourself, is this input upgrading or degrading my nervous system? The answer to that question should determine your proximity to that person. The second type of person to be mindful of and potentially distant yourself from is what I refer to as the energy vampire. There are so many energy vampires on the internet. This isn't necessarily someone who is negative or toxic on the surface. In fact, they might seem enthusiastic. They may seem animated or even charming, but after spending time with them, you feel mentally, emotionally, and sometimes even physically drained. So if you're feeling those things, then you might have an energy vampire. And sometimes if physically drained, and that's not by accident. It's the result of cognitive and emotional overload from a neuroscience perspective. What's happening here is a chronic overactivation of your prefrontal cortex, the area of your brain responsible for executive functions like attention regulation, emotional control, and working memory. When someone demands constant attention, dominates conversations, talks at you instead of with you, or requires you to be perpetually on guard to manage their emotions, it taxes this system. So I have people like that in my life, right? I have people that I've been raised with that are like that. And the boundary was necessary to not be around them anymore, because that shit's exhausting. And when your prefrontal resources are depleted, you start to experience what we call cognitive fatigue. You'll also notice that your automatic nervous system shifts. You might feel your heart rate elevate. Oof, it's a terrible feeling. Your breathing becomes shallow, or your shoulders tense up. Gosh, I wish I would have known this stuff as a child. That's because being around high drama or high maintenance individuals can send your nervous system into a low grade sympathetic state, essentially low level fight or flight, even if you're not aware of it, right? Because for me, it manifested into illness because I wasn't aware that that's what was happening to me. Consciously, your body is preparing for a kind of social survival over time. This kind of exposure can actually blunt your dopamine system, reducing your motivations, your creativity, and your baseline energy. It also affects your sleep quality because your system doesn't fully return to parasympathetic rest and digest mode. See, this is all really important things to learn about ourselves. After prolonged interaction with someone who constantly drains your psychological resources, it's important to understand these people are not always malicious. Sometimes they're just unaware, emotionally immature, or chronically dysregulated themselves. But the impact on you is still real. You can't afford to spend the majority of your social energy in a one-sided interaction that leaves you depleted and unfocused. So what can you do first? Increase your awareness. All right, folks, increase your awareness. Start tracking how you feel after spending time with certain people, not during, because during your nervous system may be too busy coping to give you clear read, but after, do you feel inspired? Do you feel grounded and recharged, or do you feel scattered? Do you feel anxious or tired? That's your signal. You don't have to confront or accuse. Sometimes the most powerful move is simply to reduce exposure. create buffers, set time limits, prioritize environments and people that leave you feeling clear, calm, and centered. Remember, your energy is not infinite, and protecting it is not selfish, it's essential. It's essential to your long-term mental performance and emotional resilience. The third category is one of the most dangerous, not because it's loud or obviously disruptive, but because it operates in a far more subtle and insidious way. I'm talking about the non-believer in your vision. This is the person who consciously or doesn't believe in your capacity to grow, evolve, or achieve what you're striving for. They may seem supportive on the surface, but their tone, their language, and their body language often says something else entirely. Sometimes it's disguised as realism. That's really hard to pull off as you are. Sure, that's a good idea. Maybe have a backup plan. Now, to be clear, constructive feedback is essential. It sharpens you. But there's a difference. There's a difference between constructive challenge and quiet sabotage. This person often speaks from limitation-based thinking. And what's crucial to understand this is that your brain is listening. When someone repeatedly questions your goals or subtly undermines your direction, it alters the chemistry of your motivation system, specifically your dopaminic pathways. Dopamine is not just about pleasure, it's about anticipation drive and forward movement. The more you feel supported and see in your goals, the more dopamine is released in anticipation of achievement that fuels sustained effort and momentum. But if you're constantly exposed to people who doubt your capacity, that forward drive begins to erode your brain, starts to associate your vision, not with excitement and possibility, but with resistance and judgment. Over time, that can lead to hesitation and procrastination and even self-sabotage. You begin to internalize their skepticism. Their voice becomes part of your own inner dialogue, and that's where real damage is done. What's important to remember is this. What's most important to remember is this. Most people can't see beyond their own nervous system. If someone has never chased something ambitious, if they've never taken a real risk or redefined themselves, then your growth will feel like a threat to their identity. Their doubt is often just a projection, or their own fear or regret. So how do you handle if you don't need to argue, you don't need to convince them? What you need to do is distance, protect your vision like a fragile ecosystem. Let only those in who bring sunlight and water, not shade and storms surround you. Oh, let me read that again. What you need to distance, protect your vision like a fragile ecosystem. Let only those in who bring sunlight and water, not shade and storms. Surround yourself with people who remind you of your potential, not your limitations. Because at the end of the day, your brain builds according to the signals it receives and believes your own and the belief of those around you is one of the most powerful signals there is. Next on the list is a type of person who often files under the radar because their behavior can initially trigger our empathy, and that's the perpetual victim. This is the individual who always seems to have something going wrong in their life and yet never take ownership or action to change it. There's always someone else to blame, always a new crisis, always a sense that life is happening to them, not through them. At first glance, this might just seem like someone who's going through a hard season. But when the pattern is constant, when it becomes a permanent identity, it creates a deeply dysregulating effect on your own nervous system and mindset. So if you're hanging around someone's channel that's always in that state of victimhood, and these are some of the symptoms that you may be experiencing, take a break. When we're around someone who consistently operates from a place of helplessness, it activates our mirror neuron system, which are designed to help us empathize and relate to others. That's a good thing in healthy doses, but chronic exposure to helplessness can begin to teach your brain that passivity is normal, even acceptable. Over time, it can subtly shift your own sense of agency, your belief in your ability to affect change, which is one of the cornerstones of mental health. There's also a well documented phenomenon in psychology called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. It's a state where, after repeated exposure to uncontrollable negative situations, an individual stops trying to improve their circumstances, even when opportunities to do so arise. And here's the kicker. Being around someone who constantly lives in that state can cause you to start mirroring elements of that mindset, especially if you're not aware it's happening. From a neurochemical standpoint, your stress response, particularly the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, can become chronically activated. When you feel responsible for someone else's perpetual crisis, this means more cortisol, more emotional dysregulation, and eventually empathy fatigue. You're constantly showing up for someone who never shows up for themselves, and that imbalance has real consequences. What do you first recognize the distinction between someone who is in a difficult chapter and someone who is attached to the role of the victim? The victim, one wants healing, the other wants attention without accountability. You can support the former, but you have to create boundaries with the latter. You don't have to be cruel, but you don't have to be clear. You are not responsible for solving other people's refusal to grow, and your nervous system cannot and should not carry the emotional weight of someone who is determined to stay stuck. Protect your energy. You can offer compassion without offering your life force, because the more you stay connected to people who refuse to rise, the harder it becomes to rise yourself. Okay, we're almost done, folks. The fifth type of person you need to be mindful of and often distance yourself from is the envious saboteur. This individual may not be openly hostile. In fact, they might appear friendly, supportive, even proud of your achievements. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice something deeper, more uncomfortable. Their praise often carries an edge. Their feedback feels undermining. Their energy, while subtle, is contracting, not expansive. This is the person who smiles when you win, but their eyes don't. And that incongruence, your nervous system picks up on. And it picks up on it immediately, whether you're consciously aware or not. Let's talk about the brain level dynamics of this envy, particularly covert envy triggers. The pain matrix in the brain studies using MRI scans have shown that when someone feels envious, their brain lights up in regions associated with physical pain, like the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. In the same way, receiving that envy in hidden or passive forms creates subtle signals of threat in your own brain. Your brain senses the shift in energy, the drop in safety, the friction, and begins to activate a low-grade stress response. You may feel yourself second-guessing a win, downplaying a new opportunity, shrinking instead of expanding. That's not random. That's your nervous system subconsciously reacting to perceived social threat. But it gets more damaging over time. Chronic exposure to this kind of dynamic begins to affect your dopaminergic system, reducing the natural drive and reward you associate with your progress. Your brain starts to link achievement not with joy, but with guilt, with discomfort, with relational tension, and the long run that can lead to self-sabotage. You begin to dim your own light to keep others comfortable. Here's what's key to understanding people who envy you. You aren't reacting to what you've done, they're reacting to what they've not done. Your growth confronts their stagnation. Your discipline confronts their excuses. Your courage confronts their fear. And instead of facing that, They try to downgrade you. So what do? You don't retaliate. You don't need to prove anything. What you do is step back, create space, elevate your environment, surround yourself with people who are not just okay with your growth, but inspired by it. People who celebrate your authenticity without comparison, competition, or subtle sabotage. Because when you're building something, whether it's a business, a new version of yourself, or a different life entirely, you need people who can space for your success. So a person that can hold the space for your success without making it about their own, wounds. Your brain, your goals, your nervous system, they deserve that level of alignment. Okay, so here's the sixth one. Almost done. Let's talk about the drama magnet, the person whose life is a revolving door of chaos. There's always a problem, always conflict, always a fire to put out. I'm thinking about one of my family members. And somehow, no matter the setting, work, family, friendship, even online, they're always at the center of what's critical to understand. Here is that this isn't just bad luck or coincidence. This is behavioral patterning, often rooted in a nervous system that has become addicted to chaos. Yes, addicted. Here's how it works on a neurobiological level. So what I'm recognizing when I've read all three of these is the pattern within my family and why it has been so important for me to defeat this generational trauma. And these are some good tools to help counteract some of these other individuals that need to figure this out for themselves. When someone is raised in or becomes accustomed to unpredictable environments filled with volatility, emotional intensity, or instability, their nervous system gets calibrated to that as the baseline over time. The brain begins to associate dysregulation with normality. It starts to seek out the same level of unpredictability and stimulation, which is what I can see on some of these panels as well as an example. Not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. This means their brain becomes reliant on elevated levels of stress. So maybe that's what I've been doing without even realizing it, right? Is that the drama was familiar to me in the past. Now I've been able to step away from it and recognize that I don't always need it. And I can step away from it and tap in and out when I want to. Their system starts craving drama the way an addict craves a fix, because that's what keeps their neurochemical loop going. And here's the problem. If you stay close to someone in that state, they will pull you into their loop. So that's why I've been saying online that you've got your people who are pimping out drama and narcotics online because the people are addicted to it. And you've got the littler versions of it that are selling the tricks for the drama pimps. Let's see here. The drama. It's pretty much saying the same thing. Where's the last part? The last example. Okay, so here's the last one, the manipulator. The manipulator, this is the individual who distorts facts, twists conversations, and uses subtle or overt tactics to control your perception, behavior, or emotions. They may not yell, they may not insult, but they bend reality just enough to serve their own agenda. And here's what makes them dangerous. Manipulators often operate below your level of conscious awareness. They're not always the obvious villain. In fact, they often appear highly intelligent, articulate, even charismatic, but their power lies in their ability to disorient you emotionally and cognitively. Let's talk about the neuroscience behind that manipulation. Uh, Mic check. Am I back? I think so. Okay. Good thing I'm at the end. Okay. Here's the end. Um, Constantly reacting to emotional confusion and uncertainty. You live in a state of subtle stress, not always full blown panic, but a low grade persistent fog that dulls your clarity, weakens your boundaries, and erodes your self trust. And that's exactly what a manipulator wants. They thrive in. They thrive in environments where you're off balance, where you need to keep the peace, overrides your ability to speak. It overrides your ability to speak your truth, where you end up prioritizing their comfort over your own integrity. And here's what's key: manipulators don't want partnership, they want control. Control of the narrative, of your decisions, of the emotional landscape you both share. But here's the truth: your brain needs to hear confusion. Wait a minute. Here's the truth your brain needs to hear. Confusion is a red flag. The healthiest relationships don't make you feel disoriented, they make you feel clear, seen, and empowered. As someone constantly leaves you second guessing your worth, your memory, or your intuition, that's not love, that's a threat to your nervous system. So, what can you do? Clarity is your weapon. Stop explaining yourself. Stop trying to make them understand. Instead, observe the pattern and choose to disengage. The moment you stop feeding their need for control, the dynamic begins to dissolve. Remember, your mental health is built on internal coherence. The alignment between what you feel, what you know, and what you act on. Anyone who consistently pulls you away from that alignment is not just draining your energy, they're disrupting your neurobiology. You owe it to yourself and your future to walk away at the end of the day. This isn't just about avoiding negativity, it's about protecting the architecture of your mind. The neural circuitry that governs your focus, your emotional regulation, your ability to grow, adapt, and pursue meaning with clarity. The people you surround yourself with are not neutral. They're either reinforcing the highest version of you or pulling you away from it. They're either expanding your capacity or draining it. Your brain is like plastic. It rewires itself every single day in response to what you expose it to. That includes your habits, your environment, and absolutely your relationships. Cutting ties isn't always easy, especially when the person is familiar or when they're tied to your past. But staying connected to someone who repeatedly violates your peace, your clarity, or your direction is a form of self-abandonment. So here's the challenge and the invitation. Audit your inner circle without guilt, without justification, just with honesty. Ask yourself, who do I feel more grounded after spending time with? Who makes me forget who I am or doubt who I could become? Who brings noise and who brings signal? The answers will tell you everything, because the most powerful nervous system in the room isn't the loudest, it's the one that's calm, clear, and regulated, aligned. That's what you're building. It requires protection. You don't need to explain. You don't need permission. You just need to choose yourself. Alrighty. Sorry about that. I do know that there has been some power outages going on around the world. Hopefully that isn't something I'll be experiencing here in my part of the world. But thanks for the couple of you that stayed around as I had that issue with my internet. Peace to you too, Red. Peace to you too. All right. It was a lot of information. It was same stuff repeated over and over again. And hopefully it's something that you will benefit from. So rewire that brain, guys. Rewire that brain and get yourself on a better track of health and mindfulness. Thanks for sticking around. Take care. With any connections or situations, the universe will show you 3 warning signs, 3 red flags within the first 3 months. Okay. Yes, I agree. Things have happened in threes for me in my life. I agree with that. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. Take care. Be prepared. You never know what's going to happen. Make sure you guys have food that won't spoil, extra water on board, because this earth is rocking and rolling. Take care. See you around.